Hi, everybody. Great to be with you all. And I'm here with Simon. Good to be with you, Simon.
Hello, Sebastian. It's wonderful to
And
be together again.
I know we haven't had a chat for a while, have we?
No,
And we've both been out there interviewing people, or out there from our homes, interviewing our fellow colleagues and herbalists, and
I
having
think
some
we
great
I think
conversation.
we're competing with each other for backdrops. I think the clutter rather says it, doesn't it? We have a lot on our plates.
It's true. It's true. It's piled up over the years. Um, I know you've enjoyed your conversations, and I've had some really enlightening conversations.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I've been learning a lot. Um, a few standout things for me is when I was speaking with Graham Tobin about cleansing and alteratives. He told me that he doesn't think alteratives exist, and I think that's a interesting view that herbalists we have some of these actions that need to be made more specific.
Yep.
Julian Barker also held me up on nervines and whether they're a relevant category at all as well, and that we need to be much more specific in our language. And so that was a good learning.
And I've just been amazed at what people have done. I mean, we've talked to some really impressive people in these herbcasts, people who've really made contributions, made their way. I mean, one thinks of Mark Blumenthal in the US, who's almost single-handedly brought herbal medicine into the much bigger conversation. And you stand back and you warm your hands over it. You know, the energy that some people have been able to put into this.
It's so true. There's just a depth of experience and a wealth of knowledge, isn't there?
Yeah.
And we've been getting lots of great feedback and questions from our audience and other herbalists and interested medical practitioners. And one thing that people have been asking me is, how come with all this great knowledge and expertise and evidence, why is herbalism not at the forefront of healthcare? Why aren't we on the NHS, or why aren't we part of mainstream healthcare? And Simon, you're one of the most experienced herbalists in the world today, really, through the time you put in and the studies you've put in and your clinical experience. And I know you've been involved in legal sides and political sides and clinical sides. I just wonder, what do you think, Simon? What are the things behind why we're not more
Well,
respected?
there's certainly lots of scars on my back. I was reflecting that I became president of the NIMH, National Institute of Medical Herbalists, in 1983. So my first presidential address was over 40 years ago. And I remember what the topic was. I said at that time, we're at a crossroads. We'd come out of the 60s and the 70s. We'd emerged from being alternative medicine into complementary. We were sort of looking, much more widely at the world. Everyone was excited about what we could do to change the world. And so I said, well, up till now we've been living in the farms and in the rural, if you like, context. We've been living in little villages and little communities. We've been living among our alternative friends. Is it now the time to go and bring this message to a much wider audience? So there we are, 40 years ago. And I'm not sure how far we've come. A long time during the 80s, everyone thought we should join the NHS. Frankly, I'm very grateful we never got there. The NHS, I think, would destroy everything we've done because of all the procedures that is now in place. We're really lucky to be able to have a one-to-one connection with our patients without all the cumbersome stuff that our colleagues in the NHS have to go through. I think that was we ducked that bullet, I think.
I hear that, Simon, and I know that there'd be many a complication and there's been history there. But one of the things that strikes me with that is that as herbalists, we want to serve our community and serve as many people as possible. And of course, the NHS is free at the point of service, and herbal medicine certainly is not for most people. And so there is that barrier. And so I just wonder how that limits access, or whether it drives people to an over-the-counter reality where obviously the herbal industry's boomed and is booming or growing, should we say, as people seek more control over their health. And so, not that it's
well, certainly in terms of our biggest impact on the wider populations. It's the herbal supplements and the herbal medicines that you buy over the counter that have made the big impact. And, might dare remind you of the impact that Pukka made in bringing the power of plants in the form of teas and supplements to a very much wider community than I was used to. So we know it can be done, but the practitioners seem to be lagging behind, don't they? And I wonder whether some of my patients, and most of my patients are regular people in regular work and regular employ, and I just wonder how freely they describe the wonders of their experience to their friends and family, saying they've been to a herbalist, because one suspects that in some quarters that would be, oh, really? What's that? It's almost like, oh, you mean you've gone over the fence? There's almost something slightly other about herbalism at the moment. Whereas if they'd said they've been to an acupuncturist or an osteopath, no problem. Everyone now accepts that they're part of the system, and you can even get insurance for the other complementary practices that so far we've not been able widely to get. So yeah, there is a bigger question. Why are we lagging behind as practitioners? And what do we need to do? I think that's really where we want to go today, isn't it? What do we need to do to change that?
Yeah, and what's behind this lack of trust in the practice and the practitioners of herbal medicine? Because, as I understand it, the training is rigorous.
Yes.
To become a herbalist is a full-on medical study of many years, requiring scientific, medical, clinical, and very specific knowledge of the materia medica and the herbal drugs, if you like, the herbal medicines we use. So what is this lack of trust that is in society? It's confusing in the media when you read things. On one hand, herbs can cure all things. On the other hand, they can kill.
They're dangerous.
You.
Yes.
They're dangerous. It seems like there's resistance from medical profession towards herbalism to a large degree from a regulatory point of view anyway. And yet there is a demand. We know there is a demand because, as you were saying, the growth with Pukka or the dietary supplements or food supplement industry is growing. So there's obviously a need and a demand from our fellow colleagues and citizens. So what do you think is behind some of this reluctance, prejudice, historical blockage?
Well, historical is probably the key, isn't it? Because most of our modern medicine is built on the premise that we've moved on from what they saw as their medievalisms of traditional medicine, and they all thought we were dying in squalor and misery until antibiotics came along and until modern surgical techniques and all the other things have come along, and they've basically saved our lives. Well, historically that's not true. I think urban life has always been a challenge to the human being because, if we go back to where we lived in villages and farmsteads and up mountains, long life was quite common. And one's teeth usually remained in one's skull, and one had other signs that generally were quite healthy. So I think it was probably the move into urban environments with all the sanitation and other challenges, and that's when, in a way, herbal medicine lost the game, because we couldn't compete with all that, the sewerage and all the other things, and so you needed some heavy duty medicines to come in and save people's lives by half killing them. That's, if in a crude sense, is where modern medicine came in. It fitted the new needs of an urban society. So we find historically that the herbalists also moved into the cities in the UK, at least, after the Industrial Revolution, but they moved straight in from the countryside, set up shop. Interesting that the shop was the actual channel through which they survived initially in cities. And I keep coming back to the idea that the apothecary model, where you have a front of house and a back of house, still remains the most resilient model we ever manage in this environment. So I think and there was some wonderful stories, wasn't there, in the 19th century of new doctors who were very new in those days, family doctors, with empty waiting rooms looking out of the queues outside the herbalist, because these were formerly country people, working class people, who knew their herbs and who would trust their herbalist more than their doctor. So that's only 150 years ago, a bit more, 170 years ago, this was happening. So we've actually have lost some of that momentum. So it is an interesting question. How did we lose it? Well, I think one of my thoughts is that we're competing more directly with the conventional prescription, whereas the acupuncturist and osteopath doesn't. We do. And so, as I said earlier, I think most of our modern medical contemporaries think that what we now do is old and not very precise and not very effective, because we don't have the same side effects. We don't do things in the most cutting way. We are seen to be hanging on to old and not very effective remedies. That's something that we both agree is rarely needs to be put right.
With an
Plants have
out-of-date
power.
perspective. Out-of-date perspective,
Plants truly have power. And, I have a deeper thought that the reason they have power is because they most effectively harness the real power in the body, which is our healing functions. But it means that's changing the conversation, because in conventional medicine, the placebo is a inconvenient thing that you need to surpass. I would celebrate the placebo as a witness of what the body can do to heal itself with minimal intervention. And as I said once, sitting on a beach in Greece, I want to give better placebos when I grow up. I want things that actually nudge those healing powers. And I that's where I see the power in plants in my own practice, that they're mobilizing and firing up the innate healing powers we all have. That's a hugely powerful message, but it's also a transformative one. And maybe we haven't got the language in place yet, and the critical impact to shift people's perceptions. I don't know. I'm reflecting on a lot of years of thinking about this.
I know. It's a very big and broad question with many different answers, because there's sort of cultural, social, political, economic influences, aren't there, on all these things. But of course, medicine's regulation at some point has had an impact on the quality and the regulatory strictures, should we say, in terms of providing medicines over the counter, out of the back of the 60s and thalidomide crisis and things like that. Of course,
yes.
There got to be a big focus on regulation,
and they applied their regulatory framework onto our materials, which was always a tough fit.
Of course, having a regulatory model around a single molecule that can be measured in purity is going to be a lot easier than having quality criteria around a plant that's got hundreds, if not thousands, of compounds in it and is subject to all sorts of environmental variation. So there's been
here's another thought, and you can answer this one better than anybody. The where the shoe was not fitting was with the fact that we were saying we were using medicines, and I've been a member of the British Herbal Medicine Association longer than anywhere else, and so have fought for that corner. But what you discovered in Pukka, was that if we reclassify these things, or not reclassify, but remind people that these are also foods with value, added value, that you can sometimes work through those cracks. And I'd like you to reflect on what you were discovering in those early days of Pukka, when you started off just making some herbal teas and suddenly started engaging. What do you think was happening to get people to say, aha, I like this. And this looks as though it's useful to me. And I like the nighttime, and I like the digestive, and I like the other teas here because they seem to work. What do you think was going on there? Because you were witnessing something really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that was back in the early 2000s when I set Pukka up, and I suppose early on in my studies of herbalism, I felt like there was a herbal deficiency syndrome going on in society. I was like, how come there's all these amazing plants that I haven't heard about, um, and no one seems to be using very much of? Many of them taste delicious.
Hmm.
Um, why aren't they being used? And then I started looking into, there was emergent evidence and research coming out showing that if people included a certain amount of colourful plants in their diets, then of course that led to reductions in certain sort of inflammatory processes, etc. And so um, it was really a desire to connect people with plants and connect people with uh, the feeling that they can evoke very quickly in us, basically, and the fact that they can quickly reset us into our sort of best self in that moment, if you like. And of course, hot water can do that on its own to a certain degree. A cup of hot water, just sitting down and being calmer. A cup of good old builder's tea or green tea or whatever can do that as well. But there are 300,000 flowering plants in the world. 10% of which we've used for medicines, and or in our diet and as food supplements as such, health supplements. And so it seemed like a natural step where there was such a lot of tea drunk in this country, but of only a couple of species of plants, you could say, if you throw coffee, chocolate, and tea into it. And there were all these plants that were accessible for people, but they weren't being used. Of course, there were lots of other herbal tea companies, but I don't think they were led by herbalists, or they weren't
Mm.
developed with a herbal team. And I was lucky at Pukka to have some of the best herbalists in the world working there, and so as a group we could drive the connection with
Yeah,
people. I
and
think what
and
was
every,
happening is people were awakening to the benefits. That's what happened. It was like it met a need with people seeking how to not have caffeine, how to have a healthier lifestyle, and they
what was
connected
so
with the fact.
what was those early feedbacks that you were getting when the pucker teas were growing at the rate they did? I mean, there was a little bit of a this sort of curve, wasn't it? I mean, they slowed both, but then it began to pick up.
Oh,
I'm
it
just
took
one,
years, Simon.
yeah, yeah, I know,
It
remember, yeah,
wasn't like some,
no,
no way. It was about at least 8 years before we really started getting
yeah.
proper
Uh,
momentum and distribution and
so
everything like that.
what I'm interested in is what drove that momentum? What was the feedback you were getting from the people, who were selling out? Our people at Pukka who were, you know, tramping around the shops, whether that was the health shops or the supermarkets. What suddenly was the word coming back that,
I think people were surprised it could taste good. I think that was one of the main things. People were like, "Oh, this actually tastes good," because in a lot of the herb industry, people are using pretty basic, bog standard grade of herbs, especially back then. It's moved on
yeah,
quite a bit since then, but just using a herbalist grade herb, you could call it, what would be coming out of the pharmacopoeia grade, so making sure you've got the right amount of essential oils, other compounds, colourful pigments, etc. in there. That was the main thing. Blending them in a way that would actually be a mirror, if you like, of a gentle herbal prescription. Using a low dose of things as well, so that a low measure of 1 to 2 grams, and you can get this amazing flavor and a better night's sleep, or help you digest your meal. And I think you lent on it earlier. I think it was just that. It's that the herbs initiate the body's own healing process, you can say. That, but also you could just say the herbs help the body do what it's trying to do anyway. They help us
yes,
digest, they help us sleep,
yes,
they help us reduce inflammation. And so that's how I saw it with Pukka, was literally just giving people little bits of benefit in their life and then feeling that. And Simon, we've been blessed. We've had thousands of letters from people, um, you know, appreciating how their lives have changed from a simple cup of tea. And so if you think what a simple cup of tea can do, what do you think going to see a herbalist can do? It's like you're
exactly.
supercharging the
Yeah.
knowledge that you have about your health if you see a herbalist and you understand the nuances and the
So
particularities of your own health.
if only we could just hold that for a moment. I mean, that's what, when I joined Pukka, that's what really excited me, was that you had made that jump from us, beavering away in our practices to actually speaking to a much wider need and a much wider audience. It was really exciting. And I also remember, just the people who were Pukka consumers were so much more lively and, energizing than we had been used to in our own community. So, can we, I'm still thinking we've done it, we've seen it happen there. Is there any way that we could envisage doing that again?
I mean, the mirror is, in a way, is that, not that we want this to be about Pukka per se, but, you take the idea of a community of people totally focused on something, absolutely dedicated to, quality, sustainability, doing the best job you could do. If you put that into an organization of professional practitioners, and we could find a way of harmonizing some of the approaches, then I think you've got something super powerful. So, maybe let's go back to what we were talking about, that, how did we get here? But, what is the state of herbalism today? Let's see how far around the world we get. But, we can start in the UK, and maybe we'll cross a bit of Europe and America. But, what is going on today? In terms of how many organizations are there? Who are the main bodies? What's the scene?
Yeah. Well, I would first of all hit off with a cultural observation, which is one that I used to amuse people with, and still I think is correct, is that there are only 5 countries in the world where herbal medicine is in a minority, and they happen to be the UK, give or take Ireland, but it's the UK, North America, both the US and Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And what is the common feature of those 5 countries? And I'll leave that in the air. It's fairly obvious, I would have thought, what that was. So there's something about the Anglo-Saxon experiment that seems to have been particularly disadvantageous for us, because if you go into France, if you go into Germany, if you go into the Netherlands, if you go into Spain or any other European country, you'll find herbal medicine very prominent in every pharmacy.
But not professionally, though. It's definitely been...
Well, then in some countries, Germany for is notable. There used to be, and recently you need to do your phytotherapy exam to practice. And although they had rather disemboweled the traditions and were using only simple one-line medicines, there was still an expectation culturally that there would be a herbal component. And in France, I think was not so long ago, 10% of prescriptions were phytotherapy. So although it wasn't what we understand as herbal medicine, there was a cultural assumption that herbs were okay.
I think you're right. There is in mainland Europe a greater affinity with nature and plants and the outdoors, etc. You could say, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's championed across Europe as a professional practice.
Profession that we know. It comes back to the idea of that we actually are almost unique in Europe of having a herbal practitioner sector. It's illegal still in some countries. In France still it's illegal to be a herbalist technically, and there wasn't so long ago that one of us was in jail for practicing herbal medicine. So there are regulatory barriers, and when you go further east you find even more peculiar things, because their herbal medicine is much bigger because it's cheaper. In the old Soviet Union it was very big because it was cheaper, but it has now become a lot of that initiative has been sort of, say, westernized. So some of that culture of using herbs as a first line defense seems to have gone. But then when you go out of Europe and into Asia and into other parts of the world, you'll find, of course, as we all know, herbal medicine is still very prominent.
Well, I mean, in China, obviously, there's billions of prescriptions being written every year, probably, and India as well. Although I wouldn't say, I've got more experience in India, I wouldn't say that Ayurveda is exactly lauded as a high-class profession. It's, I would say...
It's still a popular thing rather than a professional thing, isn't it?
Yeah, basically. I wouldn't, of course, it gets support from the government, and there's a whole department, government department, Ayush, etc. But I wouldn't say it's held in the highest respect. I still think there's a pejorative mindset around plants, and maybe it goes back to...
And that's an interesting theatre, isn't it? I mean, as you say, India quite well. I mean, what do you think has driven the professional caste against us?
Well, I think you said it in terms of the sort of Anglo-Saxon experiment. I think has sort of,
Yeah.
infiltrated some of that thinking, and it's slightly unfair to put it like that. You could call it the Enlightenment movement. It's the desire to help and heal. I think is obviously behind a lot of
Mm.
contemporary, all
Yeah.
contemporary medicine is to remove
Yeah.
suffering, and I just think
Yeah.
there's a perception, often rightly so, that it's quick and fast and can do a lot of the work. It's just there's been a division, and I think could be down to us needing to get our act together as herbalists to have more professional courses, to have greater regulation in the supplies and the herbs are supplying, and also in our ethical development as professional organisations. That is all in place now. Of course, every organisation's got highly sort of ethically developed professional organisations, but still in the UK we seem to have quite a few different organisations that operate, and we feel marginalised. I'd say we are
Yeah.
marginalised,
We are.
politically, socially, economically.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
Herbs are geographically marginalised. They often grow in the perimeter or the periphery of
Yes. Yeah.
society.
Yeah. And
So,
and and I spent a lot of my time with doctors actually, and have done all of my life, working life, and so I'm on the council of the College of Medicine, originally the
mhm,
Foundation of Integrated Health, and interestingly, I'm the only complementary practitioner on the council of the
mm,
College of Medicine. Most of them are GPs, one or two consultants, but mostly GPs. And we keep asking ourselves the question, why is the College of Medicine's membership mainly complementary practitioners and the council mainly doctors? And, I've had so much experience of giving presentations, providing learning experiences for doctors, and they all get very excited when they sort of peer under the bonnet of herbal medicine and they begin to see, oh, really, this is fantastic. But then they go back to their practices
mm,
and their hospitals or wherever they work and find it almost impossible to apply those principles.
mm,
So we really have a tough one to get into that system of medicine that we now are in. We seem to find it really hard going. So, do we do something radical? And I think probably we do, where we build our message among the community that is ready for it and get it strong, and then be resilient when things start flying at us, or
mm,
when the NHS gets really broken, or whatever it is, that we're match fit, so to speak. Um, or and do we think that we're going to impress the regulators and the medical advisory panels and all the other things that get in our way? My guess is we won't. That somehow we need to find, as you were alluding to a minute ago, to find our own community, get that strong, reduce the tribal factions that there are within the herbal community, see if we can find that voice that we want.
mm. There's plenty of marginalised communities, sadly, that
Yeah.
are good at joining together and
Yep.
creating a loud noise, an action for their smaller community, isn't there?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I just feel that we have so much potential that we could offer there, and of course that is happening as well. So we're not saying that these things aren't happening. We all
Yep.
inherit the sort of history of our ancestors in a way, and various different forces, don't we? It feels that after the, should we say, the last challenge of the regulatory working group and the efforts that were imposed on herbalists, perhaps to seek professional regulation, and some of the issues that arose there between the different approaches. That was, how many years ago was that now, Simon? Was that 10 years ago now, or something like
No, it's longer. Yeah.
that?
Yes, time does
Anyway,
roll by,
time
doesn't it?
flies.
Yeah.
So it feels like, from what I hear, that lots of the herbal schools in Western herbal medicine and Chinese herbal medicine, anyway, are in great demand. That they are
Yep.
getting filled with
Yeah.
students. The
Yeah.
Hartwood the
Yeah.
Tonicas of the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
Northern College of Chinese Medicine, etc. You know, these
There is a demand
this big
from.
educational demand.
Yeah. It's because it's such an attractive career, occupation, not a career, because we don't have a career child, but to be able to spend your life helping people with natural remedies is such a privilege, and you can see the attraction.
Yeah.
And there is, as you say, keep saying, there is a demand. We haven't yet been able to tap into that bigger want out there. But yeah, it's, when all the universities closed down, and we thought that we weren't going to suddenly get any more students, the private colleges stepped up, as you just said. And so now, as you say, we've got a wealth of new talent coming in. Can we harness this new energy?
It feels exciting, doesn't it, from that point of view, where there seems to be lots more research going on into herbal medicine, almost sort of exponential growth in clinical research and very relevant understandings of safety. There's a really much greater awareness of sustainability and areas around where we're sourcing our plants and how the harvesters are looked after. But also it appears that there's some very strong therapeutic gaps that we could fill, is that we could have some very clear role in certain, across all areas of health, but there seem to be some areas where there's particularly good evidence of herbal medicine with, you know better than me really, but, with regards to immunity, inflammation, circulation, some of these areas that modern medicine can help, alleviate often and support, but doesn't have such good solutions. We could really play a big role
what we call the therapeutic gaps. Yes. Yeah, a very, very strong feeling here that, and I think we all agree, modern medicine is fantastic for mending broken things and for when things have gone past the point of no return. But where there's any opportunity to fire up your healing powers, that's when we can really be much better. I remember a very intense discussion. It was Jonathan Miller was one of them, the playwright and doctor, with medical colleagues at one of the late night shows where, they admitted when they were pushed against the wall that their medicines don't heal. What they do is they put something in place to allow the body to heal, and they had to admit that actually the healing is not done by the doctor or the medicine, it's done by the person doing it. And that's a profound statement, which doctors will admit, if they think hard enough about them, that these magical medicines that the pharma creates don't heal. So we have this capacity to step in after the doctor's been, so to speak, and left the sort of mess behind. They've fixed the tumor or the lesion or whatever, but there's still a person there needing to rebuild their lives and their health. That's often manifests more in what we might call chronic illness, because that's where increasingly modern medicine isn't very good at. You can alleviate the pain, you can alleviate the inflammation, but things then start falling off at the end. What we could do really fundamentally is to get in at that time when the body is struggling to repair itself and give it the extra welly that it wants. So I think almost any chronic condition we're in a stronger place than modern medicine. So chronic inflammation, chronic immunological problems, certainly anything to do with the gut is that's our space, isn't it? And I would add, because we're dealing with the modern needs, I would add old age as a condition that we really should get sharper on, because we do have, all the smart money is now saying that you can't reduce inflammation in the brain, which is now understood as the main factor in many long-term aging and psychological and mental and neurological conditions. You can't do that easily with modern medicines, but some of the things you find in green tea or in rosemary or in blueberries or whatever they are, these are the things that seem to get through and do the job. We've got an aging population, there's a huge health crisis. Why are we sitting here?
Well, the article you wrote on the brain as a vascular organ and
Yeah.
neurodegeneration sums it up really well. If anyone wants to read Simon's article on that, I'd go and have a look at Herbal Reality site because it's very revealing, really. So lots of potential. So I think there's summing up, we've got this solid base. We've got a great broad community with potential to
To
collaborate
grow
and
and grow.
harmonize
Yeah.
further. What it'd be good to talk about the future and what that holds. And perhaps we should touch on as well, given that you just mentioned how we could focus on aging there, and a couple of our herbs that are particularly useful for that are under threat. One, rhodiola, has recently gone on the list as a CITES, an endangered species, and is now banned for trade unless it can be proven to be from a sustainable source or cultivated. And ashwagandha, of course, as well, which is super popular, but has been recent articles, research over the last few years coming out of Northern Europe and America and now India about its potential liver toxicity. So maybe you could talk about ashwagandha for a minute and what you think, how
Having
that
written.
reflects on some of the safety issues we face, and then we could talk a bit more about the future and what we can do.
Well, I think we do have a weak flank in our state. And this goes back a long time. I remember two historical events. One was in the 1980s when some Australians rediscovered the fact that comfrey contained penicillin alkaloids, and particularly in the root. And the old British Herbal Medicine Association, led by Still with Fred Fisher Hyde, prominent in its ranks. He was the one who founded it as a member of the National Institute of Medical Herbalists. It was very much an NIMH-led industrial trade association. And we all met at what was then the Medicines Control Agency and agreed to not sell comfrey root way back in 1984, 5, something like that, because we couldn't muster a strong enough argument to say that it was safe. Because if you look at traditional stories, which is what we get so much of our value from, it's very hard for somebody in a non-modern environment to spot a liver problem that might arise 50 years, 40 years, 30 years after you started taking a medicine, a herbal medicine, because the problems that we were encountering were not directly linked to the ingestion. They were something that could happen sometime later. And people died often of liver problems in the old days without anyone having a clear idea what they were. So we really, on an academic and a theoretical base, found it very difficult to say, oh no, comfrey is safe. We know it's safe. We couldn't say that in the context. So we admitted immediately that we would no longer sell comfrey root over the counter. Practitioners were left to some extent to carry on, but certainly in terms of the trade, it was stopped. And then the second thing was, there was a really amazing series of reports on Chinese herbs for eczema in children by a hospital in London, who really led the way in showing that this really worked for recalcitrant childhood eczema. But they were also reporting liver issues because they were monitoring the liver. And this was an interesting thing. No one had done that before, but they were saying that the proportion of these children were actually getting markers of liver distress, and that they recommended that everybody who took herbal medicine should have liver function monitored. This was 1991, it's thereabouts. And then we had the Germander issue, which was, when skullcap was thought to be dangerous because it was actually sold as camedris instead of Scutellaria. And that was found to have a potential liver harming effect. So I've grown up feeling that is a weak flank that we haven't yet sufficiently mustered arguments for. Then Carver got lost on pretty much the same basis, and then we did actually lose Carver, a huge loss. Some of us fought tooth and nail to keep that one, but we lost it. Then along comes now ashwagandha, which most valuable non-British herb of all, isn't it? So here is something that's used in vast quantities in Asia, suddenly implicated as potentially causing liver harm. And as you said, one of the papers actually came out of India, which was really new, but it was written by authors who had a bone to pick, I think. They were well known to want to hunt for trouble. But nevertheless, they found some fairly damning data out of hospitals in India which showed that there was a link. So what's going on here and what can we do about it? And I sort of went through their data with a tooth comb and came to the conclusion that there were times when it was probably a bit more risky to give ashwagandha, and that I suggested some cautionary advice to our colleagues. I don't give it if you've got serious liver disease, which unfortunately is one of the indications traditionally, but it does seem as though that is where it raises the risks of further trouble. And because it has pretty much the same mechanism of trouble as paracetamol, Tylenol in America, that probably is not a good idea. Probably better not to combine paracetamol or high doses of paracetamol with ashwagandha. A couple of things like that. And more importantly, because it looks as though most of the potential trouble that they were spotted came not from roots but from leaf, particularly important to make sure that quality control was in place, that what you were getting was actually pure root. And as our friends in America have pointed out in quite a interesting review of it, so much of the international trade in ashwagandha is actually the cheaper leaf. So
dangerous. The wonderful world of extracts,
and
standardizing things around isolated, compounds. But
because you had a lot of time with ashwagandha when you were looking for Pukka. I mean, what did you reckon was how was quality and other things managed in its homeland? Was there different stuff sent for export than used domestically? Was there any issues like that you spotted?
Oh, yeah, definitely things like that are going on. I mean, the ashwagandha business in India over the last 20 years, which is how long I've been involved with it, really, has just grown exponentially. You can't put a figure on it, I don't think, even. And there are large tracts of land where it's grown as a crop. In the sort of normal agricultural sector, there's only use of the root was my experience, basically, yes. And that's pretty rigorously done. But in the extract industry, which I've visited many extract sites in India, you'll often see ashwagandha as with the leaf and the root together, because in the leaf there is some with analytes as well. A bit like with ginseng, I think the same thing's happened, hasn't it, Simon? These valuable adaptogenic herbs. So yeah, it's the extract industry really, and that's the challenge when you get these super concentrated extracts, which I think was the same problem with kava.
Yeah, it was way. Exactly so. Yeah.
So I was in the organic sector, in a sort of pharmacopoeial organic sector, so we were just working in a very authentic way, should we say, or a way that was monitored to do it properly. But in the trade, there's definitely a lot of leaf for sale because it's a waste product essentially, and if it's got some compounds in it,
it's got some of the actives in there. Yes, probably too much of the ones that seem to be most linked to.
I mean, it's very small levels with analytes and ashwagandha anyway, so everyone's looking at ways of boosting it, and some of these. You're seeing 5% with analyte extracts and things like that when it's only at 0.1% in the plant. Yeah, I don't know. It puts my blood pressure up.
Exactly. And I think that is one of the challenges we've got, which is that the industry sometimes lets us down because it's meeting a commercial demand. It's a little, what happens if we suddenly become popular? There is prices to pay, isn't there? Because, we have the luxury so far of watching our quality fairly closely because we're a fairly small business. But if we started getting mega, would we all be suddenly swamped by these same challenges of having to cut costs and
I think it's just incumbent, particularly from, we're talking about herbalists in a way, which is almost a different sector to the over-the-counter world. I think it's just incumbent on herbalists to just work really closely with their suppliers and make
Yeah,
sure their suppliers are doing the job
the
they
job.
need for them in terms of
Mm.
only routes, testing for any contaminants,
Yeah,
whether they be environmental or industrial, and then checking for marker compounds. I think you just need sort of basic, which, most reliable suppliers in the UK for Ayurveda, Chinese, and Western herbalism do, of course.
and we should put a call out to the British Herbal Medicine Association with their Herbal Practitioner Suppliers Scheme and their
Yes.
new herb mark, and strongly recommend our colleagues to look for suppliers who have the herb mark now, and that is now most of our good ones, the ones that we know are good, have got that herb mark.
And
And
so
that's
that
at
herb mark
least
basically ensures that you get an independent auditor going into the company and doing a proper sort of
we don't have
GMP standard.
yeah. It's not a police mark. We're BHMA can never be a police
No.
operation, but it's at least it's a self audited that they check the boxes that they've done this, that, and the other, and that's a lot further than simply just not bothering, which can happen.
Yeah, there's
So
many
yeah,
corners can be cut.
you're quite right. Let's bump up the value of quality by buying our stock from people who put the effort in.
And that's and it's a challenge there. And I think the advice you've given about ashwagandha is preemptive to the community in terms of what to look out for. We know that all medicine is dependent on the context of who is having how much of what and when.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the Chinese medicine trial looking at liver problems. I just want to put it into context that in Chinese medicine, I can't remember the exact doses used in that trial, but Chinese medicine tends to use much, much higher doses than in Western herbal medicine by a factor of 10 or 20 often. So we should just bear that in mind, that it's a different game altogether, potentially.
Mm.
But when you're treating some of these acute skin diseases or things like that, you need to use much higher doses. And so that's
Yeah,
part of that approach as well, where it's highly successful. And Western and Chinese Ayurvedic dermatologists do extremely well because they can be so effective in treating some
well,
of
that's
these.
interesting because what they're doing is they're stepping in where I've just said we weren't, which is in the acute sector. In our home practices, we're not doing acute medicine very often. Occasionally, I get a call in the middle of the night, but not often.
Sure. We do get a bit of acute skin. We get. I mean, there's no doubt
Yeah,
about that because in a way, but it's can often be chronic. It's acutely uncomfortable.
Yeah. And so much of our tradition was built on what we might call acute medicine. As you said, much higher doses for acute emergency conditions, which we've, in a sense, got the luxury of not having to deal with so often. And our doses have come down consequently. So does presumably our risk of stirring things up comes down a bit as well. But that's an interesting thing. And if you look at the history of European and UK herbal medicine, it has been a dose reduction history, and remedies that were used, for example, for fever management. One thinks of hawthorn, for example, classic example, have morphed into something that actually our forebears didn't know anything about: blood pressure and circulatory conditions, which they, in the way we understand it, they didn't have any reason to know anything about. So it's interesting how medicine can morph and shift to fit new cultural and technical perceptions. But
Right, but it's always
sometimes,
as though we set this up because, which we haven't in that way. But, leading into the future,
yeah,
what does what it'd be good to just chat briefly about what are some of the things we think that might hold for herbal medicine in terms of opportunities and challenges. You mentioned ashwagandha there, and we're leaning right into that as a current present opportunity that can be a challenge if we don't manage it properly. What are
yeah.
some of the other areas you think you're excited about, worried
I'm
about?
very excited about our contribution to the current problems of affluence. In other words, living longer and bits falling off, as someone once said, as you get older. That we've got stuff that'll help put bits back on again. So we can really come into our own in what we might call the third age. So as a lot of our practitioners now are young and youthful and not able to think, not needing to think too much about that, that might be something that we could grow as they get older. Can we get cleverer at working with an older population who, by definition, are more health conscious because they can feel it in their bones, literally. And maybe if we could, as a community, develop a language for the third age, that would be a huge contribution that nobody else is going to fill. You know, as we know, things really do fall apart in terms of care and support for people as they get older. So that would be a long-term game plan that I could see. And that, of course, comes with also helping with the metabolic distress that so many people inflict upon themselves by the rubbish that they eat and the lack of exercise and all the rest of it. You know, as you and I know from our Pukka days, you know, we actually developed an advocacy program, didn't we, around metabolic health, the spices and some of the other herbs. Gosh, that's a huge story we could build and tell. And then a third area that, again, to put my toe in the water in is instead of antibiotics. And, you know, we already, just before the Armageddon called COVID came along, as you remember, we actually had a high-level meeting in London to discuss our contribution to this conversation about what we do instead of antibiotics. And, you know, the chief medical officer sent her apologies that she couldn't come and wished us well. We got really close. And the head of Public Health England also sent his apologies and said he was interested in knowing what we could do. And that was in October 2019. You know, what happened then? Suddenly no one was talking about antibiotics. They were all talking about COVID. But we came quite close to making a significant contribution there. And heaven knows, it's something we need to do. Everyone keeps saying about antibiotic resistance being one of the biggest things that falling on us.
It's like the quiet emergency. It's like nuclear bombs. No one talks about them, you know, but it's obviously the biggest threat to world safety. And it's like antibiotics. What is it? I think 30,000 people died in Europe last year from antimicrobial resistance. You know, it's a serious.
And it's getting and it's just going like this. So, but you know, how do we respond to that? And that come back to the point: we need to get our message clear. We need to have a community adhesion amongst ourselves that can deliver this message in a way that makes sense to people who haven't heard it before, and who don't immediately say, "Oh, it's herbal. That's old-fashioned. It's not real. It's not proper. It's not, you know, it's not scientific. It's not serious." We need to break through those barriers in a way that makes sense. So we need some good spokespeople. We need some good friends. We need some. We need some clear messaging.
Yes, I mean, I like what you said there about the community gathering together to have a more coherent and consistent voice around some of these more controversial areas. And, you know, with the obvious need of the climate and nature crisis that we're all living in at the minute, I feel very positive about herbalism being able to offer a solution for sustainable healthcare where the medicines you're using or the sources you're using for your health don't then pollute the environment afterwards. We know the problems in our rivers around the UK with physiological levels of drugs, the atmospheric problems happening from inhalers. I don't know, there's all sorts of challenges going on with what we can do as a community towards the nature crisis. And of course, because we are, you know, not to be arrogant about it, but we are the community and the tradition that holds the repository of knowledge about nature and our relationship with plants through many generations. And I think we have the sort of moral authority, if you like, to present the case for why sustainable healthcare has got a place that includes plants, but includes professional herbalists to advise around how to use those plants. And I think that our clients and, you know, members of the public want healthcare solutions that
They
contribute
do,
to a better
certainly.
world as well as better health. And
They almost need it now rather than want it, don't they?
yeah, need it.
I sort of ending my thoughts here on this with a real note of optimism because, like you, I've seen the quality of the herbal students coming through,
Hmm.
and so many of them are accomplished already in one field or another, and they've made a decision to shift tack and study this field of ours. And they're young, literally in the 20s and 30s, some of them. So these are going to be our new community. And, I think we mustn't put dampers on their enthusiasm by saying, oh, how difficult it's always been. We want to just rediscover our enthusiasms again and just say, let's go for it. The need is now greater than ever. As you said, it's piling in on us. There's an urgency now of getting this up and going. And I think, heavens, we've got some good new people coming in.
Well, you heard it here. Call out to the students of the future, the potential to help meet the needs of the current health crisis that is evident with the growth in chronic disease. And we all know that herbal practice is so well placed to meet many of those needs. And it's been really great, Simon, to just chew over some of these points and have a look back and feel what's going on now and just sense into the future, really, what we can offer as a community in all the different areas, whether it's in clinical practice or whether it's anyone involved in industry and what you can do there to enhance the quality and conversation. So, yeah, I know we both feel very privileged to be herbalists ourselves, but also to be part of this incredible community of people that's so full of talent, and the inspiration of the plant is completely infectious, and I think is what gives us all, bunches of enthusiasm. So, yeah,
I'm
really
reminded
enjoyed
of
it.
I'm reminded of a Canned Heat song. Let's get together, as the message, isn't it? This is now a time for us to bring all our enthusiasms and energies together and just
Yeah.
get on and do it.
And there's great organizations in different countries. There's American Herbalist Guilds. Then in the UK, there's the BHMA and the EHTPA, in the National Institute in America. Australia. There's other
Very
organizations. So
powerful there. Yeah.
we must work with what's there, I think, and fill gaps with the energy we've got where there are gaps. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing everything, Simon. All your time
Well,
and all your wisdom is much appreciated.
it's a real privilege to be working with you, Sebastian. I feel very lucky on many fronts, this being one of them.
Good. And thanks to everybody listening and joining in and supporting us at Herbal Reality and supporting this Herbcast. We're here to bring you insights into the world of herbalism. So do share with us any topics or insights you'd like us to discuss. And yeah, herbal blessings. Take care.
More Herbcast to follow.
Yes. Cheers.